Thank you for doing this. This is my second interview in a row with a terrifyingly good interviewer. Thanks for coming in. Stephen A. Smith, the host and executive producer of First Take, and probably really like the best known sports commentator in the country. But as he will remind you, did his time eating tuna fish and drinking Kool-Aid as a beat reporter for the New York Daily News covering high school sports, and is now branching beyond sports with a podcast called No Mercy. And I enjoyed also new memoir, which I enjoyed. And there's a part in there, actually, speaking of our conversation, where you talk about discovering the difference between being an employee and being talent. And I think we both came up in the kind of newsroom we were just talking about, where that talent feels like a bit of a dirty word. Mm-hmm. Does everybody have to be talent now?
I think so. That's not something that's popular to admit or what have you for a lot of people, but back in the day, as my mother, raised me to believe, you go to work, you put your head down, you put in that work, you get on your grind, you produce, you go home. It's not that simple anymore because the world has become ever more business-minded. You've got to be an asset. You have to bring somebody that brings value. And if you're somebody that's just doing the job, then the likelihood is that you're going to be expendable. You have to make sure that you're somebody that has some kind of an impact that contributes to the bottom line in a very advantageous way. If you don't do that, your days are numbered.
Is there a moment you realized that?
Well, when I got let go, that might have been a good time. When in 2009, I thought that I was worth one amount. ESPN thought I was worth another. They said goodbye. I was looking forward. Not necessarily that I was looking forward to it because I wasn't happy to be gone, but I certainly was enthused by the potential prospects. And then quick, fast, and in a hurry, I realized they were non-existent and that what I thought about myself wasn't necessarily the accurate depiction of what was really, really out there. And so as a result of that, I recognized and I learned the hard way that I made a crucial mistake, and that was not mastering my business. What I thought I wasn't accurate with what my worth really was. And I think that my life changed not just because my mother checked me and she was the first one to tell me that I wasn't worth what I thought I was worth and that I was a bit more problematic than I needed to be, but also getting out there and really, really understanding what they defined as my value. And I'm not just talking about ESPN, I'm talking about the business of sports journalism. If you're working for a network or what have you, there are ratings, there's revenues, there's Q scores, and all of these things that really highlight and illuminate your value. You need to know what that is. You don't need to assume. You don't need to just have an emotional attachment to anything. You need to be mindful that the industry itself defines your worth in that industry. This is what they say you are. You need to know what that is. And when you know what that is, which talent usually does not know. You don't usually have the accurate information in that regard. You usually depend on agents and managers and others to try and acquire that information for you. But it's important as a talent that you know that, because when you know that, it does a tremendous amount for you. In my case, it allowed me to depersonalize things. A lot of times in the past, they don't like me. They feel whatever way they feel about me. It's not fair. I'm being marginalized. I'm being pigeonholed. And then all of a sudden, the more you know, the more educated you are about you as it pertains to the business, the more you realize, well, wait a minute here. This is what the numbers say. And if the numbers say this is what my worth is, then they were right to make this offer to me. And then as a result of that, you don't personalize anything and you're able to move forward because you have a thorough understanding of what your worth is.
It's a tough way to think about things. The sports journalism, you wrote, you've written about this a lot, talked about it a lot, but you were very close to Allen Iverson when you covered him. Yeah. And you write in the book about going out with him and kind of trying to figure out where the line was between, if he had a bad game, do you write about what he did the night before? Where do you keep people's secrets? Where do you expose them? How should journalists think about that? Is sports journalism different in that way?
First of all, it was never a struggle for me to find the line. It was very, very clear. If you played like garbage, I was going to say you played like garbage.
But you weren't necessarily going to say what you're doing the night before.
No, because that's your personal life and your personal business, and there is a line that doesn't get crossed in that regard. If you're breaking laws and stuff like that, don't let me see it because you're going to get in trouble because I'm going to let them know. But if you're not breaking any laws or anything like that, and you're just living your life, what you're doing with your girlfriend or your wife or significant other, that's your business. You know, I don't get involved in stuff like that. My job was to cover the sport. And so there was a line that you clearly drew in the sand where they knew exactly what was open season and what was off limits. And your game is my domain. You can talk all you want to, but whatever I see on that court or that field of play is what I'm going to write. And if you played like trash, I'm going to say you played like trash. And if you played great, I'm going to say you played great. But I'm certainly, when it comes to your personal life, that's not the game. And that's your story to tell.
Do you think political journalists ought to follow the same rules?
No. And the reason why I don't feel that way about political journalists, because political journalists are covering politics and politicians. Politics and politicians have dominion over our lives. A basketball player, a football player, a hockey player, a tennis player, you're playing a game. If we like you, we'll ingratiate your project. We'll ingratiate ourselves with your product. We'll work with that, and we'll go from there. But when you are a politician, and we're talking politics, we're talking healthcare, we're talking education reform, we're talking taxes, we're talking immigration, we're talking all of these things that have a direct impact on the lives of the American people. You don't get to just sit up there and have your own life when you're trying to infiltrate my life and affect profoundly the amount of money that comes out of my pocket in taxes, what I'm paying in property taxes, income taxes, sales taxes. The list goes on and on. You volunteered. Nobody forced you to go into that realm. You clearly wanted to go in there because you wanted to have a profound influence over having dominion over people's lives. You want that kind of role? I got a right to know everything I can about you.
I think a lot of American political journalism actually it clearly borrowed from sports journalism, from what you were doing. I think a lot of political TV comes out of ESPN. And now you're getting into, some of your podcasts are about politics, and I can feel that you're trying to have the same kind of like really spirited, fun arguments that you have on TV about politics. And I'm curious, I think I can watch you on TV, I can totally disagree with you, love the show, and I wonder can you do that in politics?
I'm not trying to be loved. Let's get that out the way first.
So you're trying to be listened to.
I'm trying to be listened to, but I'm not trying to be loved. Not when it comes to a podcast where you're talking about serious issues. When I'm talking about sports, I'm talking about games. And we're debating those issues back and forth. And it's clearly understood that it's a game that you're talking about here. But then you get into a money aspect and you're talking about people's livelihood. We've got Lamar Jackson, for example. He's a player for the Baltimore Ravens. When you're trying to explain to an audience out there that he's been insulted because he was offered $133 million guaranteed, you've got to elaborate on such a thing, because the average person is not going to comprehend that until you recognize we live in a capitalistic society where your market is determined usually by what the market is and what other people have acquired. So if you got a Kyler Murray who's never really won yet, but he's got $189.5 million. You got a Russell Wilson who hasn't won in years and has been on a downslide to some degree in some people's eyes. He gets $165 million guaranteed. You got a Deshaun Watson who you believe can win, but obviously had legal issues, getting accused of a bevy of transgressions, but yet the Cleveland Browns still show up and give him $230 million guaranteed, the largest guaranteed contract in the history of the National Football League. And if I'm Lamar Jackson, I'm a former league MVP, I'm an electrifying talent whose box office that everybody's clamoring to see me every Sunday, and you've taught us as a system that the market determines our worth. And then you turn around and offer me $60 million below what that market says it is at that particular moment in time. That's how it makes sense. So you gravitate to a level of seriousness at that particular moment in time because you want to explain to everybody this is what it is. But in the same breath, you're talking about games. You're talking about life. In terms of politics, that's a different matter altogether. So with sports, I'm mixing in the seriousness with trying to have fun. When I'm doing my podcast, it depends on what the issue is. If I'm interviewing, I'm getting ready to interview the two congressional figures that got expelled from the House in Tennessee because of arguing over gun control. I interviewed Sean Hannity a few months ago. I interviewed Chris Cuomo a few months ago.
Hannity on the show
It's not a game.
He said he thinks you're a conservative. Is that
Well,
right?
no, I don't believe that. I think that I have conservative views. I'm unapologetic about that. I mean, for the most part, I voted Democrat throughout my life. Am I beyond voting for a Republican? Absolutely not. I am beyond voting for Trump. I ain't gonna apologize for that. But it's not because of his politics. It's because I think that the presidency is statesmanship. You have to come across as somebody that believes in galvanizing the country, not dividing it. You have to be somebody that's committed to that. And if you're not committed to that and you're focused on yourself with your narcissism and you're not thinking about the nation as a whole, that's problematic for me. I'm not telling you anything I wouldn't tell Trump to his face. I knew Trump before he
Yeah,
went.
you used to talk to him. You ever talk to him anymore?
No, I don't. I knew Trump before he ran for the presidency. I thoroughly enjoyed talking to him. He was a huge sports fan. He used to throw a lot of events at his casinos and stuff like that. And I genuinely liked him. I didn't know who this guy was running for president. I think he's changed, but I will tell you this. I think when people call him racist and stuff like that, I've never thought of Trump that way. He's not against black people. He's against all things not named Trump. There's a difference.
I mean, listen to the podcast. You obviously think about politics a lot. You ever think about running for office?
Never. I'm not
trying to break some news here.
I don't think about it because it would require me to ingratiate myself with people to curry their vote and support. I'm not good at that. I'm good at being real and as authentic as I possibly can be and letting that speak for itself. And if I had to sit up there and compromise that in any way because I needed X number of votes in order to win, I don't think that I don't think the vast majority of people rather would vote for me being my real, true, authentic self at all times. I do believe this though, I would not lose a debate.
I know, I don't think you're losing this one. Speaking of topics you've been very politic on, Jim Dolan, I think you described him as a child in a man's body. You said he makes you sick. Knicks are doing pretty well at the moment. You had a change of heart?
No, I have not. I'm very pleased with what I've seen the Knicks do. And believe it or not, I take no enjoyment in having to say something like that about a grown man like James Dolan. Obviously, he's an astute businessman. His daddy achieved a lot, and he's benefited from that. We get all of that. But my problem with him is that there's been so many times where the New York Knicks have, as a sports guy, I happen to know, there's been many occasions where he's alienated athletes and their willingness to come to New York because of how petulant and paranoid he comes across as. I don't know him personally, but I know what actions he's engaged in that has been a turn off for people. And so when you look at the professional athlete out there and they're thinking about the high taxes in New York City and the congestion of the traffic and all of these different things, you have to make their work environment appeasing to them. And when they talk about working for the New York Knicks organization, because the business of Madison Square Garden has always hovered over that franchise, when you have to preoccupy yourself and concern yourself with that as an organization, and as players, you got to worry about that because the owner is a stickler for that stuff and controlling spin and alienating the media and all of this other stuff. That has worked against the New York Knicks, and it speaks to their level of irrelevancy for the better part of the last quarter century. They're relevant now, thank God. But the point is that because of what they've done in recent memory, it's hindered the hopes of New York Knicks fans everywhere, and I do resent him for that.
And a final question, I guess, at the intersection of a lot of culture, politics, sports, and something I think you might have slightly strong opinions about. The NBA recently agreed with the union to stop testing for marijuana.
Yeah.
How you feel about that?
I don't like it. Listen, we live in a society today, over 26 or 27 states have legalized marijuana. Obviously, a lot of them have done so for medicinal purposes as well. As an individual that had a mother back in 2017 that, obviously I've always been against its use, but I certainly wanted to explore it for medicinal purposes for my mother. She did not support that, so she didn't want to do it, and it did not happen. My position, I'm talking about recreationally. When you think about the genetic makeup of weed, marijuana, in this day and age, and you do enough research, you hear that its potency is about 400 times greater than it was in the 80s and early 90s. Well, in layman's terms, ladies and gentlemen, that means that a lot of these dudes are high, okay? And as a result of that, don't tell me that to some degree it doesn't compromise you. Now, in fairness to them, they will adamantly disagree with it. Strong proponents of marijuana use.
These are athletes on the court.
Not athletes, yeah, on the court, fields. It's not just basketball, it's football, it's baseball, it's a lot of different, it's hockey, it's a lot of different places, okay? But a lot of these guys talk about using it and that it's not a drug. You know, you sell alcohol, you promote and advertise alcohol and stuff like that. Okay, fair enough. What I'm saying is, when you're on a court or field or rink of play, I want to be able to look at you, and I feel an audience has the right to look at you and know that your very best natural capability is what they're witnessing. If you are inebriated in any way, whether it's literally with your physicality or it's with your brain function, whatever the case may be, if it's compromised, they're not getting the best of you. And if they're not getting the best of you, I think an audience has a right to feel that way when you have your hand out for their money. I'm very, very big on that. I don't, a lot of times as a black man, we feel a lot of ways about a lot of different issues in this world, but where I part ways with some of us from my community, being specific, is when we want to say what we want to say and want to do what we want to do, when we want to do it, how we want to do it, but you got your hand out for somebody else's money. I wasn't raised that way. You running your own business, you don't need somebody else. There's a level of freedom that you should be able to enjoy. But when you know that you require the assistance of other people, capitulation to some degree for all of us is an order of the day. You don't have to capitulate with everything. You don't have to capitulate with most things. But to give the impression that you don't want to capitulate at all, that just means you don't want to be accountable to anybody but yourself. And that is not how you win in life.
Well, thank you for taking the time, sir.
Thank you.
Somebody who's always totally present. Really appreciate it. Thank you.